the gap between being a child and being an adult?
Just completely sort of moment to moment and not thinking about the consequences of things and just being completely nuts.
Oh, the word youth. It comes up with a lot of different connotations, actually. I think it makes me think of being younger, for me, on a personal level. It then makes me think about the youth of today and my kids and teenagers and how unsurly it can be. That's a little bit rude, but I'm going to be honest. I would often think about, oh, we weren't doing that in my youth. And I often compare to what I see around now. So that kind of makes me feel old. So youth makes me feel old.
I think of young people without any responsibilities. I think of young people who have the world at their feet and choices, wonderful choices to be able to make. I think of happy times.
I would say 14 to 17 is kind of the main bit of youth.
Probably 15, around about 15.
Between sort of 15 and 19.
16 and about 19.
I think sort of like definitely teenager, but into 20s as well, early 20s.
Holy moly. That's not two of them. Wild and stressful, hedonistic,
Fun, carefree, and busy.
Fun, free, and privileged.
Exciting, sad, and challenging.
Or tomboy, skateboarder, bunker of school. 3 sentences, actually.
I don't really miss anything. I think it was like, it was then. I did it. I'm glad it's over.
Good health, a good memory, and freedom.
The sort of carefreeness, so lack of responsibility, I guess.
Having lack of responsibility that I now have. I miss making the friends I've made over the years, because I think when you're younger, when you're 16, 17, that's when I think you make your friends for life. I miss that, and that feeling of excitement as a youth in discovering new things.
I do wonder sometimes if we have a slightly jaded view on our youth, because it becomes a distant memory, and you're clutching to certain things that seem really nice and really fun and all the things that are associated with being fancy free and no responsibility, and that's all lovely until you become an adult. But I think a lot of it is about that idea of it's just really carefree, no worries.
I mean, my youth, my teenage years that was the height of the 60s scene. So I remember many things in my youth that were exciting socially with my friends. But I do have favourite memories also of the time I spent with my mum, going round looking at clothes, and it was a very exciting time because fashion was it was going through a revolution, which she loved and I loved, because she loved it because she was still quite young, and she was into clothes, and I loved it because I was a teenager, and we used to go around trying all these things on. I remember we used to try hats on as well, and we used to roar with laughter. We never bought the hats, but I remember that was a happy time with my mum. And something else I miss about from my youth is that I don't have my mum anymore.
Yeah, playing in the woods, kind of building camps and stuff like that. I think special times that you don't realise at the time.
I suppose making the friends that I have made who have become my lifelong friends, particularly when I got to sixth form. And that for me is one of my favourite memories of meeting all these new wonderful people who have since become great friends of mine.
So I used to love being at work, doing my Saturday job, knowing that I was going out later, and the whole sort of thing associated with getting ready to go out, going out, meeting my friends in the queue for Club Alien, dancing the night away, going to a random squat in Finsbury Park.
I had quite a challenging teenage in terms of our family as well as being a teenager. My parents were going through a very long, drawn-out separation and divorce, so that had bad times attached to it.
I don't like thinking about what I put my mum through in those years. I think that was pretty hard work.
Yeah, the actual specific beginnings of boarding when you feel a little bit homesick, but actually it wasn't lasting.
Not a terrible memory, but just the realisation that you're going to have to make life choices. I suppose for me it was a daunting proposition of knowing what's to come in my life.
Absolutely. We didn't have prom. We didn't really have that. I remember there would be like a big party, and I think one of the worst things was just thinking of what you had to wear. So think of Madonna, all the bling, and that was what a lot of the girls were wearing, and that wasn't me at all, and it was just horrific. It was probably the most horrific evening of my life. I felt itchy, I felt scratchy, I felt kind of like, oh, what am I in? Everything felt uncomfortable, and it was a lot of judgment about, going to this party, and I hated it. I absolutely hated it. What regrets from my youth? Yeah. Oh my God, many. Not going to school, not really. Oh God, there's so many. Yeah, I had quite a lot of regrets. I hung around with some bad crowds at times as well. I think I bunked off school for quite a long time in one year. Like in year 10, I really lost interest.
Yeah, well, yes and no. I think when I was doing my O-levels, I had to retake a few. Actually, no, my A-levels I had to retake a couple of my A-levels. My O-levels were fine. It was my A-levels. I think I should have applied myself better, I think, to my my exams earlier. And by the time I got to sort of sixth form, I ended up being a bit, not wayward, but I discovered people.
One, weirdly, that my first proper girlfriend when I was at school, and I didn't walk her home back to her house, and she got attacked, and it was a bit of a weird. Yeah, it was not a nice time, because I felt, quite rightly, that I hadn't done the right thing.
I regret some things that happened, but I wouldn't call them regrets, because those things weren't in my control.
Yeah, I wish I'd taken A-levels more seriously. As it was, just like to say that I now think that everything was mapped out for me, and I was meant to do really shitly at my A-levels and meant to go to Chichester I'm meant to meet your dad, I'm meant to have a baby in my final year. And so if I'd worked harder, done medicine at university, been a doctor, I might have been hit by a bus or something. If I tried to re-divert what was destined for me, it wouldn't have worked. It doesn't matter. There's no point because we have no control over those things.
Genuinely not a lot. I was pretty lucky.
I probably would have still done all the things that I did, but I would have been better at protecting my mum from it all, because I think she is a little bit scarred from it.
I think I would have tried to have had more impact on some people close to me, or given some better advice, because they were not making good choices.
I wouldn't follow my careers teacher's advice. And I remember I really wanted to get into drama and into music and into just to do something more creative. And my careers teacher told me back then, I remember it vividly, he said, you should do accountancy, Calvin. You go to a secondary school in Hackney. How many people get jobs in the field of work that you want to go into potentially? I followed his advice and I started my degree in accountancy and I hated it. I ended up becoming a teacher, which I love. But I wish I had just pursued what I really wanted to have pursued from the outset, just to see how far I could have gone with that.
Don't sweat the small stuff.
I think it's a bit of a cliche, but I would say just to enjoy it, because you don't, like most things, you don't realise how good it is until it's gone. And that you stress about, when you're a youth, you stress about the detail of everything, just to be a bit more spontaneous then, and worry less. But it's a formative time, so that is why you worry. But yeah.
Have confidence in what you really feel. Don't follow the crowd too much. And actually what your mum does say is actually true. She's not just being a bitch.
To follow your heart, Billy. To follow your heart in terms of what you really think that you should be doing. If you've got the opportunity to, and the means, the wherewithal to do it, to do what you're really passionate about.
Maybe I used to feel quite affected by friendships, like things that happened within friendships. So if somebody was horrible, I'd be really upset by it. If somebody was falling out with somebody else, I'd be really affected by it. If someone was just a horrible, horrible cow, I'd be really like lying awake thinking about it at night. I just took everything really to heart, and I sort of felt very deeply about things in terms of friendships and relationships and whatever else. And I think I'd probably say to myself, don't worry about it, because everything works out in the end.
Definitely the whole impact that social media's had on youngsters. I think that everything is so out there. People's lives are portrayed in a much more flowery way than they really probably live, and I think it creates a lot of insecurities for young people looking at others. The whole thing about fashion and body image and all those things were only just coming into play in the 60s.
Yeah, I think that there's an expectation on younger people now to be more, in many ways, to be more grown up than we ever had to be, because we were out of touch in terms of phone and blah blah blah, but more that actually, you were a kid for longer when I was young, in a good and bad way, than they are now. And so I think kids now have more pressure of the social media stuff and are more susceptible to the bad things of that, but also they get to be a kid for much less time.
I think when we were going through peer pressure, it was very isolated. So peer pressure for me was just my surrounding group of friends. or just a few people, the people at school, the influencers, etc. Now, unfortunately, you have got social media and it's everywhere, and I don't think you can get away with it. I think it's everywhere that young people are. I think they can't get away from it. I think the pressure is a lot more enormous to strive to be this, to be that, to be doing this, doing that well. I think for some children that aren't so confident or don't have that support of their parents, that could be really, really damaging. So yeah, I think that's a bit sad.
I think they face struggles with image, social media. I think they deal with economic struggles in terms of having the latest technology or trainers or clothes. And for me, therefore, it's all about image and what you look like. Yes, that was still important when I was younger, when I was a youth, but less so. And also the things that we had when I was a youth, in terms of what we aspired to have, they were much more affordable for the typical family. So of course, we know now it's ridiculous. And it's not just about trainers, it's about mobile phones, it's about computers, it's about designer clothes, it's about everything.
Time and
Young in my time.
I definitely would be happier to be young when I was young.
My time, 100%.
Definitely in my time. Definitely.
My time, every day of it.
It's like I would not be a 17-year-old now for all the money in the world.
Because the pressure isn't so immense.
There was less kind of pressure.
Because I wouldn't want the pressures that youth have today. What I see and I experience in relation to the economic pressures, the image pressures that youth have today, and that impacts significantly. I think, on students or youths' social and emotional mental health. I don't always think that they're well prepared for adulthood because of the pressures that they deal with as a youth.
The pressure to want to grow up seems to be very strong in a lot of kids now, male or female. It seems to be this big onus on, oh, I'm adult, and yet you're 14. And it's just like, you haven't got there yet, So I feel that when we were 14, in my time, we were 14, if that makes sense. There was slight innocence to us. Whereas I think now 14-year-olds are a lot older than they are, if that makes sense. I would never have been doing a lot of stuff that was being done then. I'm quite shocked by it, actually. Not call me old, but I'm quite shocked by it.
In terms of the prospects that they have and it's scary.
I just think it's a lot more full on now. I think there's a lot more. You've got more stuff to be on top of if you want to do all of that. You get less time to just go and do stuff, and more time to worry about things. So yeah, I think the experience is probably more stressful now. I think people put more energy into managing how they are perceived, because they want to be up with their friends and in with things and not missing out on things. That's the other things. We didn't really know what other people were up to, so you didn't know you were missing out on stuff. So therefore you just get on with what you're doing. And now I think there's a lot more expectation to be having fun all the time, rather than actually having fun.
People, in a strange way, I know difference is sort of more celebrated now, but then there was no attention drawn to it, so people just got on with things.
It was a lot simpler, just simpler. Different kettle of fish, obviously. There was a lot of other things going on that weren't great in my generation. But I think it was easier. I found it just simpler, less complicated. I think it's very complicated now. I think that's the only word I can use, actually. It's complicated now, yeah.
Even in the 60s, when there was all that allegedly free love, it was always, there was a very set way in which you would go go out with boys. I think that it's changed hugely, I think, for the better, in that you would always wait for a boy to ask you out. You'd really like a boy, you'd have a crush on a boy, and then he would decide whether he'd want to go out with you. So, I mean, that whole thing is so much different, I think, now and changing. And yeah, I don't think it's like expected now, where it sort of was when I was a teenager. To, you know, you'd have a boyfriend, or you'd be going out with someone. Now, I don't think it's, from what I've seen and what you say, it's completely different.
Relationships are probably more pressured because of constant communication. You know, there's a lot of freedom to being away from your partner or whatever and just ringing in the evening and having a chat, and that's that, and leave it. You know, now I think it's much more, you know, constant text, sort of everyone knows what everyone's up to, and so I think it's probably more stressful.
I think it's still just as strong, love and relationships, but I think it's a little bit more flippant. I think people still feel as strongly about love and having a relationship, but I think there seems to be a lot more experimentation about experimenting with relationships. What's good these days is kids are more aware sexually and don't get into so much trouble, whereas back in my day, a lot of people were falling pregnant quite young because they were quite naive about it. I think there's a lot of onus on sexuality and what you are, a lot more, where I don't, again, less complicated back in the day.
I think they're more transient now. I think younger people are in and out of relationships so much more readily. You can swipe a face and they're gone. Love and relationships for younger people now, they take it at face value initially and determine through a screen whether or not that person's going to be the right person for them before they've really got to understand or to meet a person. And as you get older, you start to realise what love really means, because it's more than just about what people look like. It's about how you engage or how you feel about that person, or the sort of life that you want to lead with that person, and why that person is in your life, and all those elements that make for that.
I don't know that, like, there's the same level of innocence and joy that comes from that innocence as there was when we were young. So if you fancy someone when you're 14 now, you can immediately text them and you might snog them a couple of days later. I think part of the effect of phones and internet and whatever else is that there's a lot of immediate gratification. I think friendships, I don't think have suffered as much. In fact, probably that'd be one of the things I'd say is positive. Now I think because your sort of like friendship base is broader because of Snapchat and whatever else, I think it's not as intense, and therefore there's not that same intensity of feeling, and so you probably have a more varied and a sort of richer friendship experience, I think, as sort of a young person now.
Friendships are more precarious now because I think people, as I said, that same sort of thing, people know what everyone's up to, and therefore it's more difficult to keep them going. I suppose it's easier to have shallow friendships now because everyone's in touch with each other. You can like stuff on Instagram, you can communicate, but actually you don't spend meaningful time with friends. So I think friendships you have probably more friendships, i.e. acquaintances, and less real friends, or less friends in a deep way.
This is what I don't understand. My boys say, "Oh, I've got a friend. He's in Canada," because they play online with him. Like, how's that a friend? I don't get that. That's something that's quite interesting to me, because I think, how can you be a friend? I know your friend's playing a game online, and I'm sure you do sort of chat, but you've never met them, you've never seen them physically, and you've called them a friend. I don't know if I'd classify that as a friend. So I think, friendship's quite different now. I can't place why. It just seems a bit disjointed to me.
I'm not suggesting for a moment that you can't form firm friendships now, but I think about things like Facebook and you've only got to look on people's profiles, and when they have 547 friends, really? Can you have that many friends, real friends? The notion of friendship is something that people shouldn't take lightly. It's something that we need to embrace and develop and nurture, because particularly I think for people as they get older, as you get my age and our parents start to get older, and eventually we know that they're not going to be there for much longer. And if you haven't got many brothers or sisters or a wider family circle of people, who else do you go to? You've still got your friends. And so as you get older, if anything, friends become a lot more important to you. And that's why, for me, my friends are, in essence, also my family.
Having experienced the drug culture in the 60s, there was the huge drug explosion in the 60s, and I'm very much in this area as well. And some bad things happened. It just was, the world went crazy. In the post-war, there were things called Purple Hearts and things that were helped to pick people up, and that there was a big sort of almost epidemic in that, and people became addicted to them. Someone very close to me was involved in that. Yeah, very sad. And I did see the fun of that time and the fun of doing bits and bobs of things like that, but I also remember clearly the terrible things that happened as a result of that, of drug use, especially by young teenagers. But there were people at school who did acid and things like that and ended up in St Luke's mental hospital, and to this day aren't right. Actually, when I think back on it, I had a close group of friends and most of them didn't. They still went to dances and loved the 60s music and embraced the music revolution and loved all that, but they didn't take drugs. But of course there was a core that did. Then of course I think in the last 30 years, certainly the cannabis sort of culture has been great rife in some schools. When Emma was at school, when Max was at school, it was huge in terms of in schools and clubs and everything. I think the use of drugs in the last 30 years, certainly from my experience, was much greater than the use of, is much bigger, much greater than the use of drugs in the 60s, when I think the majority of people didn't do it. Or if they did it, a bit probably like me, they do it as a sort of experimental thing as 15, 16, 17, 18-year-olds, once, 10 times, 20 times. That was it. Now I think it's much more habitual.
When I was growing up, alcohol wasn't viewed as a drug. So you had something that is a drug, technically, that is completely mainstream, and almost everything else was in a different category. And now, because I played a lot of sport, I drank, but I didn't really do any of the other stuff. The connotation at the time was, well, drinking's fine, everything else is kind of a bit out of it. Whereas now, actually, I think, you get people who, smoke weed and pot and whatever, who do that as a lifestyle choice in the same way that someone might love wine or alcohol or whatever. So in my time, people either did or didn't drink, and otherwise there was the sort of being into drugs, being a druggy type scenario, and now it's a much more mixed bag, that you can be into one thing and not another, or some bits of drugs and not others, and
I think it's more easily accessible now, it seems. Actually, I think drugs are a lot more easily accessible. I think a lot of kids know where to go to get drugs if they want to. Whereas back in my day, it was, does anyone know where you can get a joint? Who can we get it from? And it would be like, oh, he knows. Let's go knock on his door and he might. So it was a big convoluted journey before you got there. Whereas here, I think it's a lot easier, and I think that is down to iPhone, having phones, social media. It's a lot easier to connect to people, isn't it? A lot faster. I think people are more blatant about it. I think it just has become a bit of a norm. Whereas before, for us, it was taboo. Whereas, we were very scared if you were taking drugs or whatever. It was very secretive. Whereas now, it just seems really... I walk past guys and I'm like, I can smell... it's really obvious, really obvious. I just think they're not so bothered. I think we didn't drink as early as a lot of the kids now did. I don't think we experimented with drugs or any of those things until a lot later. I hear of it a lot younger now. And I think that's a little bit scary. The pressure to want to grow up seems to be very strong in a lot of kids now.
This is just post my youth, actually. I think I was going to my early 20s. It was the beginning of a big drug culture that's just escalated and got bigger and bigger. It's massive. It's much more significant now, I think, in young people. And now I think, my understanding that most young people, most youth, have tried something or will have tried something by the time they get into adulthood. I do think there's more of a leniency towards the softer drugs, things like cannabis, smoking. I walk down the streets and I smell it more regularly now than I ever smelled it before. People are quite much more blasé about it and much more relaxed about it. But when I was younger, drugs, they were always really, really taboo. You just didn't touch them or go anywhere near them. It's just interesting how people's perceptions have changed, and that may be also because there was so many more drugs on the market than there ever were before. If anything, when I was at school, we were never educated about drugs at all. But young people now, they are well informed about drugs, and they know the side effects of drugs, and you can Google something and it says, if you take a pill, you're likely to be fine. You might think, I might take it, I might risk it, being told, because I suppose if you're ignorant about not knowing what the side effects are, as I was back then, would you risk it?
I think people are more aware of the dangers of drugs. I think it's talked about more. I think particularly if you think about like non-class A drugs, like the effects of cannabis as an example, have been more widely sort of documented, like the serious effects of it, whereas before everyone's like, we're just smoking some weed and da-da-da. In the 70s, 80s, early 90s, you were still sort of dining out on the like hippie sort of image of drugs. So I think people are more aware of the dangers, but then I think people need to be more aware of the dangers because I think actual drugs have changed so much over the years. So like, it's virtually impossible to buy normal weed, like was around when I was a teenager, without landing on some flipping, I don't know, heroin-laced skunk or whatever it is. It's like a whole different thing. I feel like everything then was more natural, sort of more innocent, less dangerous. So that worries me.
Yeah, your voice is heard as a child and all those things. I grew up in a very strict regime in a school, and it was it was oppressive. I think in general, children and youth are now heard and listened to and have views and opinions. Of course, when I was younger, it was you do as you're told or you rebel. It's much more open now and much more fair.
Schools are thinking in quite a positive way. I think there's less pigeonholing. I think there's less of an expectation that, if you went to public school, you do this, you do this, you do this, blah, 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 and that actually I think it is more of a meritocracy. I think people do have more of an opportunity, regardless of whether they went to private school or state school or, grammar school or in between, whatever.
School and education, there's a lot of things that are, I feel, not addressed. I think the youth of today are taught how to pass an exam, but not how to apply it in real life.
It's got harder, a lot harder, certainly when I started teaching even. When I was a youth as well, and certainly even before then when I was at primary school, there weren't exams, there weren't SATs, Key Stage 1, Key Stage 2 SATs to take. No tests. The children didn't have the same kind of pressures. Is it right? School is, education is, without being political, because I'm allowed to be as a head teacher, it's got progressively to be more difficult because schools are inspected at quite high levels. Schools have got to get certain standards to maintain their status as a good or an outstanding school, and you've got less money in which to do it. So therein lies a huge difficulty. It's a lot tougher. It's a lot tougher for teachers. It's a lot tougher for children. And I sometimes think that what we do is we try to teach the basics to children before they're ready for it. Okay. I was taught algebra and maths at secondary school when I think I was about 13 or 14, and I got it. It was tough then, but I still got it. I got it quite quickly because I was particularly good at maths. But now we're teaching the same concepts of algebra when children are 9, 10, 11. I think they're prepared for concepts far too early. Yes, they need to be articulate. Yes, they need to be good readers. And yes, they need to be numerate at their level of understanding and ability. But some of the concepts, the more tricky concepts, we haven't got to. I don't think we should be worried about them just yet. We should provide children with a really round, creative, rich curriculum offer, like you've said, with really good life skills so they're well prepared for life, in the 21st century and beyond. It's just, I don't quite know why we are drilling, I suppose, our children so young. But it's accountability framework, it's statutory, and we have to do it, sadly.
It's really hard to talk without talking from like a very personal perspective, because I'm a teacher who likes being a teacher. They're quite few and far between. I think lots of teachers are so overwhelmed by the expectations on them, put on them by the government, by the DFE, whatever it is, that we've lost sight a little bit. I don't even want to say we, because I don't sort of group myself in this, because I like to think I don't do this. But I feel like it's become very systematic and procedural, as opposed to looking at each individual child and educating each individual child in terms of their needs. I think that they don't get that same sort of individual attention that there used to be. Like, not enough emphasis on creativity and talent and sort of tapping into those individual sort of qualities in each child, and too much. Of course we want literate, numerate children and young people, absolutely we want that, but not at the cost of all else. And yeah, no, because I think when I was young there was less pressure to achieve certain percentages in certain areas and whatever, and so there was more room for sort of recognising talent and achievement and skills in other areas.
I think that more people expect to go now, for sure, and it's more of an expectation. And of course then there was still a big gender thing, that boys were always encouraged to do well, and they would be pursuing a career. It's very different now, that girls are, I don't believe I'm saying it, but it's a much more equal thing.
Well, I think there's now a general perception that university is more of a movable feast and more flexible, and that it's less of a strict requirement. There's a perception that real life work experience actually means something. I mean, I would actively not look to hire people who haven't been to uni, but I don't see someone who does a year of uni and decides they want to get working, or decides not to go to uni and start working. I don't see that as a negative at all.
I think perception of university is everyone's going. But back in my day, not everyone went. And it wasn't a prerequisite. It was just, if you wanted to really go, you'd go. But there wasn't that onus on having to have a degree. Whereas I think now there is an onus on having to have a degree to even get into entry-level employment. Because it's also about who has money to do education now. Or you end up with big fat loans, which it's become a norm as well, and that's not a nice way to start your actual career of choice in debt. It just seems a bit unfair. Yeah. So I do worry about that a little bit.
Again, I went to a school in Hackney, and not many people in the secondary school that I went to ever went to university, and none of my family members had ever been to university. So it was really hard to get into, and it was back then it was a real big thing, and you had to get so many points. It's still a big thing. Don't get me wrong, and it's just I just think that they've lost something. The status is the word that's what I'm looking for. Less of a status of going to university. Not in some ways it's a shame, but in lots of ways it's a great thing because it means that more and more people are being educated at university level.
Well, now I think that children are made aware that there are lots of routes into employment, into good employment. Like, it doesn't mean if you don't go to university, you're not going to get a good job and you're not going to earn lots of money and you're not going to be able to afford your own house. I think that that's a real difference now. I think when I was young, it was like university into employment, a career in some sort of relatively highbrow sector, or leave school at 16, don't do A-levels, and go into some sort of manual labour or retail or something equally possibly low paid. There was like one or the other. There wasn't any sort of middle ground, and there certainly wasn't any other routes into that sort of employment that might come as a result of university. Or there probably was, but it wasn't sort of advertised.
My father was very, very much a socialist, and I can remember that being a big part of my childhood. You know, the sort of labour movement, and it was after a war, and I can remember politics played quite a big part in certainly in our home life, unique because we mixed with like-minded people, but I think that now politics is much more out there, and that's come about through TV and media and awareness of what's going on, not just in our country but in the world.
When I was a youth, I don't think you did have much engagement, and I think there was a very, not necessarily strict, but you kind of voted the same way your parents did. It was something weird you didn't really think about. You were just, if you lived here and had this type of upbringing, then you were this, and if you had the opposite, you were that. That was that. Whereas now, I think people can change more, and I think it's got better. I think more people are involved.
We're exposed to a lot, and I think young people today are exposed to a lot, and maybe because they're exposed to so much constantly, either through media and television and the press, in terms of, for example, Brexit recently. Do they become desensitised to it? Do they become desensitised to it and lose interest in it because they're exposed to so much? Younger people, when I was younger, were more politicised because we questioned more, because we didn't have the answers to everything. And maybe because younger people now are exposed to so much, they feel as if they've got the answers.
I think no one was particularly interested. I think maybe what happened was, like in the 60s and 70s, I think young people were very politically active. Then there was a sort of period of apathy, which was when I was young, and now it's sort of on the rise again. Although I don't know if that's just because you're quite politically active and knowledgeable. But there was no way when I was young I knew what you know about politics, but then maybe I wasn't interested. Yeah, I think maybe like Labour getting in, I think that maybe sort of sparked a bit more interest. But again, I don't know if that I'm speaking just for Muswell Hill Billies, who are quite sort of left-wing and were happy.
I think youth are always politically strong anyway. I remember being on my degree, at university, and being very politically, involved in lots of things. I think you guys are a little bit more aware in a slightly different thing, in that the social media makes it more apparent. We only learn what we heard from the news and the newspapers, and that will be dependent on what channel you watched and what newspaper your parents bought or you bought. Now you are in a society where you get a more open, you can find the truth if you wanted to. You've got the internet. You can find the lies and the corruption, and you can see through it. So in that sense, you're a lot more aware.
I think there are more strands of things you can be into. It's not just a matter of being into you know, pop music, rock music, you know, rap, whatever. There are more different, multifaceted. I think party culture is, I think now things are more confected to a degree, i.e., again, it's about being seen to be having fun. I think things were before Instagram, before, you know, well, before even phones, so before everyone had a camera on them the whole time. I think actually things were more hedonistic in a way back then than they are now.
Party culture, lots of parties in the park. I don't know what that's all about, but that could be also. We had a lot of youth clubs when we were growing up. We had loads of places to go. There was youth clubs, youth halls. You could hang out places, you know. So maybe that's why you have parties in the park, because I don't think there's anywhere for you to go. If you're in that gap of what I'm talking about, my youth from 15 to say 17, you've got nowhere to go, have you? And I do see that. I see that there is nowhere to go to frequent, meet you up with your friends, especially if there's a large crowd of you. We'd just go to the pub or the youth club.
Yeah, different. It's so, I don't know how you do it, younger people, because back in the day, lots of really good two-step music, lots of good sing-songs, you could sing proper songs, and the music back then, in the 80s, I would say, is music that stays with us today, and they're still played on the radio today, and we still go to a party and everyone dances to them. I'm not sure that the music that younger people are into now is going to be that memorable in 20, 30 years' time from now, because of maybe because it's a lot of it is linked to the drug culture. Who knows? It just seems so fast and busy. It doesn't seem as secure, if that makes any sense. Yeah, you know about your 60s music, you know about your 70s, and this, you know, and then your 80s was your new romantics, new romantics, and disco, of course, as well. But you know, you'd have a different take on that. I mean, you live in it, so this music for you may be amazing. But in terms of music, if you're going to a pub or music venue, okay, to dance the night away, would they be dancing to tracks that are in the top 40, typically? I'm not sure. Okay, I don't think. But back in my day, all the tracks that were in the top 40 would be the tracks that would be played in discos.
I think it's self-confidence, because I think when you're in your youth, you're just like, you're trying to find yourself. You don't know what you like, really. You go along with the crowd. You follow one crowd and go, no, that's not for me. Then follow another crowd and go, oh, no, that's not for me either. So you're kind of constantly going through this barrage of trying to fit in, because you don't know what you are. You know, I can say that with hindsight. I really didn't know what I was. I was basically a tomboy, but I felt I had to get in with the girl crowd, or what the girls were doing, or, you know, they were into boyfriends, and I'd be like, no, they're a waste of time. Whereas they were really interested in the first kiss, the first this, the first that. And I was just like, oh, really? Okay, whatever. I think as you get older, you sort of become more and more confident, more and more self-assured. And I think if you are honest with yourself, like, oh, that style really doesn't fit you as you're growing up, then you'll get there. I think if you're constantly trying to seek yourself through others, then it's a different story. And I think definitely you get to your 40s and you really don't care.
I think the biggest challenge is self-esteem. I think confidence, and having the confidence to be your own type of person, to be true to yourself, not meaning that means you're inflexible. I think it's quite a significant pressure.
I think it's harder for them now. I think teenagers have a difficult time now. I think that's much more judgmental sort of world. I think they're trying to change it now, all this sort of looking at the perfect images, and that's come over the decades, hasn't it? Of these perfect lifestyles, perfect bodies, perfect this, perfect that. I think now there's a movement to try and, you know, be more inclusive, but I think that it's been hard for teenagers, hard for youngsters.
Crime, image, economic pressures, I mean drugs to a degree, because a lot of the the knife crime and the gangs is related to drugs. It could be related to fraud, particularly credit card fraud is massive as well. But there are a lot of gangs operating in and around London, particularly, and it's all driven by it's all driven by money, because and what does money get? Money gets you the latest mobile phones, the best car, the latest designer clothes, because, and then you have the image that you can present to your friends, your peer group, and for me, it's a real shame that crime for lots of young people, gets in the way.
Oh, a lot. I do worry that what you're going to be left with, as it were, of all the things that are damaging our planet, damaging society, what you're actually left with, which has been started by our generation, is actually quite a lot to pick up and fix. I think that's quite sad. So for the youth now, I think they've actually got quite a lot they've got a big burden. Big burden.
The whole social media thing is ridiculous. I mean, I genuinely worry about young people and their ability to communicate with other people effectively face to face. I mean, I know we still have probably a lot of people who can do that, young people who can do that, but there's a lot of people, I think, who are losing that ability to communicate with people face to face. I think it's insane. I think what actual social skills are these children going to have, these young people going to have? They're communicating 98% of the time through a screen. It's just completely insane. I also worry about, I think, the sort of political climate is really scary for our sort of youth of today. I really worry about gang culture. I seriously lose sleep over this.
I just don't think that those were prepared for adulthood because of them being sidetracked by all the other aspects of their life that they shouldn't necessarily be sidetracked by. And I know lots of young people who I speak to today, and I talk to them about their lives and where their lives are going, and they're completely content with where they are. But yet there are so many more opportunities for them, and it's a shame that so many young people aren't maximising the opportunity to seize those opportunities, I suppose, and they should.
I think there's an expectation that life will just continue to get better and better, and that you'll have the things that you see other people have, and you have the things that you want, and that expectation leads to disappointment when those things don't necessarily, when they don't necessarily come true.
The environment, pollution, climate change. I think that's one of the biggest worries. The other thing I worry about is this terrible split in what almost looks like, half the world is, in my opinion, a reasonable thinking, sharing, embracing people, and the other half are right-wing, ignorant. This complete two big groups opposing, and this is across the world now.
Reap what you sow. It's really important, and that is against everything, not as in drug taking, partying, and how it affects you in later years, but just in also, like we say, politically, climate change. Everything's going to affect you.
To not be afraid to be more open-minded.
I would say, above all else, be kind. That's all that matters. Horrible things happen in the world. Horrible things. Natural disasters that kill hundreds of thousands of people, disease, illness, poverty. Horrible things happen, and in a place like where we live, where we're so fortunate just to be, we were just lucky, we got lucky that we were born here. Like, just be kind to each other. There's like, nothing is that bad that you could just hurt somebody else or do something terrible, ruin your own life and somebody else's entire family's life. Just be kind.